Hello, everyone. It's Joe Polish, and I'm here with
Dan Sullivan.
Yep, the brilliant Dan Sullivan. Dan, I say that you're brilliant and like the smartest person that I know so much. I mean, how do you take that in? You'll be like, oh, that's just Joe Polish saying his stuff, or do you actually believe that, or do you take it in stride? I mean, how does one react to something like that?
Well, first of all, I believe everything you say, Joe. So over a number of years, the number of times you've said it, it's just overridden my own judgment about that. So, I just, I said, if Joe feels that way, by golly, that has to be the truth out there in the world. But I've given a lot of thought to it because, you don't want to come across as a phony. And I think the one thing that would kind of justify it, I wouldn't want to go into the smartest person in the world Olympic Games, but I think in the area where I operate, which is coaching talented, successful, ambitious entrepreneurs, and the number of years I put in for 40 years, I think probably it's justifiable in this sense that back in the early 70s, I just felt that the entire entrepreneurial experience in the future was just going to be a function of taking advantage of technology and the exponential growth of the microchip. And I've spent literally 40 years just thinking about how do entrepreneurs take advantage of the constant creation of very, very powerful technologies. And I've never seen anyone in writing or I've never seen interviews that have the particular take on it than I do, where it just applies to each entrepreneur and what he or she can do over a period of time, over 90 days or a year or so on. So from that perspective, I think I have a really unique take on just how the technological world is creating complexity for entrepreneurs, but also creating incredible multipliers.
Yeah. And, I want to say a couple of things about that, too, because, I mean it when I tell people you're the most brilliant entrepreneurial thinker that I know. And I'm always goofing around with people, and I've had friends on stage where there'll be a panel of really brilliant people, and I'll get up to the mic and say, which one of you is the smartest on the stage? And there's always the serious one that'll be like, well, and there's different forms of intelligence. So someone, they can't see the humor in that sort of statement. But at the same time, what I've learned about it, and I think both me and you play that role, and certainly we have said many times on 10X Talk that like this is a mutual admiration sort of relationship we have here. The fact that you go out and edify people, like sincerely though, you can tell when someone is just brown-nosing or kissing up to you that doesn't really know you or you don't really have rapport with, that are saying, all these wonderful things about you, and they may be missing the mark. A lot of people that are celebrity gawkers sort of have that approach where they're like, oh my God, you're so amazing, you're so great. But if you really know somebody and you say that to them, they have to almost live up to it. And It's one thing where I genuinely have experienced everything that I say about you, that you've lived up to it before I've ever said it. And at the same time, when you just really edify a person, it does make them want to live up to that. And so I think, everyone listening, it's good to take a look at who are the people in your life that you really genuinely do have respect for, and you see their talents and you see their skills. And that doesn't mean they're not human and they don't have shortcomings. It's just the areas where they really do excel. How do you go about expressing that and communicating that to them? Because you get more of what you reward and reinforce, not in all cases, but in many cases. That you can overdo it. You can actually overdo compliments to people where it then tends to lose its meaning and its value. However, I think that's more the exception than the norm. I just don't think people edify and acknowledge people enough. And I love it when you say like great things about me, because it probably makes up for what I didn't get in my childhood. But it also really is like, a guy that I respect, Dan Sullivan, he actually admires me and says these things. It really makes me want to live up to that standard.
Yeah. Well, I think that there's a lot to this, that our confidence as individuals comes partially, we're just confident about certain things we can do, but the best possible confidence as entrepreneurs, because we're really talking about entrepreneurs, comes from, the thing that you most want to do, but it's also something that makes you a hero to other people. So you got to do this combination of, I'm very passionate about doing this, but I really, really want to help a certain individual with what I do, and I want to do it in a way that actually creates financial success for me and expands my reputation. So there's a whole combination of considerations. And the other thing is that once you've told me something about myself, I really don't want you to ever tell me, I thought you were that, but you're not actually that. Right. And I don't think anybody does. I don't think once somebody's established a standard for us, that they see us hitting a certain standard, I don't think any one of us ever wants to not live up to that.
Yeah, no, totally agree. And also, it's made me think a lot about if you start really dissing on or complaining or telling someone that they're just bad or they're incompetent or whatever, even if they are, just how you go about telling somebody that. A lot of people live up to it. You know, the weirdest thing is that if people really admire you and take what you say as truth, even if you go on a rampage, you know, if you're one of these people that just goes off on your team or loses your temper, you will instill the belief in good people that they're not good if you go about and do it in a certain way. And one thing I noticed from strategic coach clients that I've spoken with over the years, because there's been several times where I've actually recorded people voluntarily. You know, I'll go in there. It's been a while since I've done this one, but you know, there's been a couple times where I've volunteered to shoot some videos with strategic coach clients to ask them what do they get out of it. And one thing that I've heard numerous times is, you know, I just feel better. I mean, I come in here, Dan, and it just makes me feel better about myself, you know, and I don't get that sort of acknowledgement in my world in quite the same way that I get it at Strategic Coach. You know, I mean, I have team members that, you know, I'm paraphrasing here, like a combination of what many people would say, but, you know, like I have team members that look up to me. I have many clients that admire us, but, you know, I don't get a peer network that really makes me feel great, and that's what I do in Strategic Coach. So I think it's real important, and I hope that virtually with 10X Talk, one of the things that I hope that this podcast is accomplishing for a lot of our listeners is that it simply makes them feel better about what they do and how they do it, and edifies capitalism and entrepreneurship and the struggles and everything that someone goes through in order to build and grow a company 10 times. So anyway, that's my rambling.
Yeah, and I mean, we discussed a little bit about what we were going to discuss on this podcast. You know, I have this brand new concept that I've created at the very, very cutting edge of Strategic Coach, which is called the 50-person future. Put simply, I said, you know, who you're going to be in the future really depends upon who you start surrounding yourself with from now on, because you know, as human beings, we don't operate alone. We operate within communities, and we're born into a community, our family being the first one, and then, you know, all the things that develop around you as you get through school, and then you go out into the work world after your formal education. And your future is either propelled forward or it's held back by the quality of people who you surround yourself with. And so a lot of people talk, well, I want a future like this, but they tend to think about it in dollar terms, so they tend to think about it in profit terms, or they tend to think about it in market share words. So it's kind of like an abstraction. They're measuring their future in abstractions. But what I found personally, Joe, is that it's actually my teamwork and cooperation with a certain discrete number of individuals who are like-minded, who have values that I have, but most of all, they have a really, really big sense of what's possible in the future. And when I'm around them, they get inspired, and I get inspired when I'm around them. So there's this reciprocal building and providing direction and morale-building conversations and a sense of momentum. So I just began thinking, because the only people I coach in Strategic Coach right now are people who have 10 times goals. And I say, well, one of the fundamental parts of having a 10 times goal is having a network of people for whom a 10 times goal would be the most wonderful thing in the world.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So in order for someone to have that sort of goal, that sort of objective, what needs to be present?
Well, we've had a previous podcast on this, which I called the 10 times matrix, and it was almost like the huge separation that's going on in the planet right now because of microchip technology between people who think everything's getting better and another part of the population that thinks everything's getting worse. If you talk to individual on what I call the scarcity side, They've got an incredibly well thought out, very, very logically consistent approach of why everything's getting better, and basically nothing they do is really going to matter. So one of the things that's important for you to realize is to have sensors when you meet someone, just to have some alarms that go off. You just don't want to have a relationship with this person because they're just going to drag you down. And on the other hand, there are people who just believe that things have been getting better. I mean, throughout human history, at least in the more advanced countries, things have been getting constantly better. And you could, by any set of measurements, lifespan, healthiness, per capita income, a sense of security, a sense of protection, and everything else. Everything's just getting better. Opportunities are increasing. Capabilities are more readily available. And if they believe that, then that's one of the early signs that, yes, I want to be with that person. And this has changed fundamentally since microtechnology came on the scene, because now we live in a world where if you have your attitude right, you can take advantage of exponentials. And exponentials simply means it's not linear growth, like 1 + 1 = 2 and 2 + 1 = 3. But you start getting a multiplier. It's like compound interest. There's growth on the growth. So if you got 2, then it goes to 4. And if you got 4, it goes to 8. And if you have 8, it goes to 16. And more, a lot of the technological world that we have around us actually corresponds to that exponential principle, not a linear principle. So that's the big one I go after. Do they have an abundance mind about the world, that there's just going to be everything you're going to need in the way of capabilities, resources, and opportunities they're going to be for you. You just have to be clear what you personally want.
Right. Nope, that's great. And if people have not heard that episode, they should go and listen to it immediately. And I use the guilt word, should. I mean, they...
Yeah,
really,
yeah.
Because
you're the guilt cop. You're the guilt
yes.
cop. I'm just the hope cop. I'm the encouragement cop. You're the one who comes. You're the hammer man.
That is comedy. Okay, so you have this great 50-person progression tool, conversation, mindset, activity. I mean, however you want to describe it.
Yeah.
So let's talk about that.
Here's the thing. Yesterday, I was in a workshop and I went through the thinking on this, and I said, I want to give an example of a person that all my criteria he has. And so I have a list, and I have a way of scoring my list, and Joe Polish is just at the top of my list. And I think this is why we're doing this project together, because it doesn't matter what subject we describe, we're going to be on the same wavelength about how we talk about it here, Joe. And so what I'd like to do is kind of just describe how, I see you and how I see you as a part of my life, and why I think that this is just going to get infinitely better, and it's going to be permanently better.
I would not object to that at all. I mean, especially if you shared this in a workshop, which I was not at. I'm curious to hear how you describe it. So, yeah.
Yeah, and, there were people in the workshop who knew you, and they totally agreed with my assessment. So that was it. But the first thing is just, what does Joe believe about the world? If you don't mind, Joe, that I just use you as the example, because, a lot of people listening to this 10 Types Talk actually know you personally. There's a great number of people who know you personally. So, I'm kind of giving them a checklist in their minds as they listen to this, of whether this corresponds to their experience. But the big thing is, all the people that you've interviewed on the Genius Network series, the people that you invite to 25K, they're people who are more than 95% of the population are taking advantage of exponential technology and combining it, the most of them do, with marketing. So they use exponentials to market, and they're very ingenious. So the second thing is, because we have these exponentials, there's a possibility of real ingenuity paying off incredibly quickly, and it's faster, it's easier, it's cheaper, and you get much bigger results. And there's just a constant creation of opportunity that's coming out of this. So you can't have any scarcity, because the very nature of the world we're living in creates opportunity for people who are ingenious and who actually believe that what's happening in the world is a really good thing. But most of all, they have a tremendous sense of gratitude. And one of the things I really notice if I talk to the successful entrepreneurial group of people, and I talk to non-entrepreneurial people right now, where we are in the 21st century, that entrepreneurs are just incredibly more grateful. I mean, they have a lot more than everybody else. They've had much bigger rewards, but they also have a much bigger sense of gratitude. And I think the two of them are very, very much connected, that I think we live in a world now where if you don't appreciate what you already have, you don't get any more. And I think that's kind of a good stopping point because you're just incredibly grateful for what you have.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I don't know if you ever saw that Louis C.K. clip. It's all over YouTube. It was him at Conan O'Brien where he's talking about everything is amazing and nobody's happy.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
The only thing I disagree with in that clip is he says, he kind of disses capitalism, but I don't think he quite understands capitalism. But, the clip is fantastic about how, and you talk about this so much too, is that we live in this abundant world. There's so much stuff and people, are still complaining about what's lacking, and you always talk about you can complain or you can create. You can't do both. Being grateful is one of the biggest ways to just switch your attitude instantaneously, is just to put yourself into a state of gratitude till it actually becomes your state. Because a lot of times you have this great audio called the gratitude principle. I've probably listened to it about 10 times because there's different types of gratitude. There's reactive and proactive and different ways that you describe it.
Yeah. I mean, I always think of his because he talks about people constantly complain about air travel, and he says, let's get this straight. You're at 40,000 feet. You're traveling at 500 miles an hour. You're sitting in a lounge chair, and they're serving you drinks. Can you tell me what's wrong with that experience? And I always think about it because, I travel a lot, and periodically there's delays. So, you're 2 hours delayed. And you see everybody grousing in the lounge, everybody's unhappy. And I said, let's see, this is 2000, I named the year that we're in right now, and I go back 100 years. And I say, here I am in 1913. And I say, I'm traveling from Phoenix to Toronto. In 1913, how long does it take me to get there? I said, I got a 2-hour delay, and then I'm going to be there in 5 hours. I said, in 1913, with everything working, it's going to take me 2.5 days. So I said, get a sense of perspective. This is pretty terrific what we have available to us.
Completely. You know what I'll do, too? I'll make sure we put the clip that we have our Magic 10X Talk technical person put the Louis C.K. clip attached with this podcast in case people have not seen it, because I think they can relate to it.
Yeah, and this also talks about our world is going to become more technological every day, every week, every month, every year. More and more of our environment is going to be controlled by computer software. Traffic systems, air traffic control systems. Amazon is the great example that your retail shopping is becoming more and more of a digital online experience. That just comes in, and I said, you have to step back about what life was like before that. And I always have, it's one of the reasons I'm deeply interested in history, Joe, is because it gets me back before the current age of progress, and you say, things were tough back then. I mean, I grew up in the 1940s and 50s, and people say, boy, those were the good old days. And I said, you obviously weren't there. I said, it was boring. It was incredibly boring. Watching the traffic light change was entertainment, So, I just have this enormous appreciation, of measuring where the world has come in the course of my lifetime, and I have to tell you, every decade it's been incomparably better. That goes for the one we're in. So that's it. But the other thing is that creativity, everybody, they read books on creativity. They talk about creativity. Universities offer courses on creativity. But a lot of the people are ungrateful, and I've got a rule that you can't be creative and ungrateful. That's just impossible for someone who doesn't have an enormous appreciation of the world that they're living in can actually be creative. So the image of tortured creative people today it's self-defeating, to be tortured. The world doesn't do this for me, and I don't have this available and everything else. You're killing the creativity in the bud. Nothing's going to emerge from that. So I think that gratitude is a necessary condition for greater opportunity, but I think it's a necessary condition for creativity, and creativity itself is a necessary condition for cooperation with other people, because people really only want to cooperate with people who bring new things to the table all the time.
Can I also say something, too, about being a cooperative person? I mean, a lot of this ties into something that you're really the only one that I hear talk about this that I'm aware of, not that other people aren't, just that I'm aware of, in the business / coaching / advice giving world, that also I know simultaneously lives it, which is the taking off of time, the free time, the free days, and just giving yourself some space in order to do that, while simultaneously being an achievement entrepreneur, focused not only on your own company, but all your clientele, growing 10 times. And the ability to be grateful and the ability to be cooperative has a lot to do with not being so overworked and so stressed out, kind of like the saying, fatigue will make a coward out of anyone, or however it goes. I'd like to come back to that after you describe cooperation a little bit, because I think the way that you do self-care has a lot to do with setting up these conditions that you do in your life in order to experience, exponentials, ingenuity, opportunity, gratitude, creativity, cooperation, what you're talking about here.
A lot of what makes people successful in today's age is having an attitude that it's not about them. I mean, our age teaches a lot of what I would say focus on the self. The people become preoccupied about themselves as if that's the reality. And really, the most successful people are the ones whose consciousness and where they're putting their attention is really outside of themselves. And it's really noticing how they can be valuable to other people, where everybody else out there doesn't have it all handled. I don't have it handled. There's areas where I'm just incapable, areas where I just can't be very, very successful. And what I've tried to do is just to pull everything in terms of what I actually create back into a circle that's just areas where I'm just very, very good at what I do. That's my unique ability concept. And then what I try to do is not get involved in any area where I am not any good, but what happens in that area, then I find someone who's better than I am. And really, cooperation really starts with the recognition that you're only good at certain things, and there are other people who are really, really great at certain things, and we can do a teamwork, and that's essentially, it's a teamwork between my unique abilities and a teamwork with their unique abilities, and that's really what we call cooperation.
So what I'd like to do is kind of wrap up this section of this episode of 10X Talk on the 50-person progression, and then on the next episode we'll go deeper with it, because you have a thing called the double multiplier criteria. But so the 50-person strategy, you even have this in Strategic Coach, where you have a graphic, which is with 10X as your goal, all progress is now about developing and expanding 10X relationships, and then accelerating multiplier progress and results. And the first ones create the next ones, and that's where you go through exponentials, ingenuity, opportunity, gratitude, creativity, and cooperation.
Yeah.
And at the bottom it says your entrepreneurial growth now comes from your multiplier networks, and you have arrows pointing, one to abundance upward and one to resourcefulness.
Yeah.
And so how does someone wrap up these 6 things that you just talked about?
Well, first of all, I have a saying that your eyes only see and your ears only hear what your brain is looking for. So it's how we program our brain that totally determines what we notice, okay? So what I'm saying is, just talking about myself, I'm just looking for people to go through the list. I'm just looking for people who totally believe in exponential capabilities, resources, and opportunities, who are using their ingenuity to take advantage of these things that other people would be fascinated with, who have a tendency to create great opportunities for other people, who themselves are very grateful and they're very creative in their relationships with other people, and there's constant expansion of cooperation. Okay, so what I'm saying of Joe is that I may have had all kinds of relationships in my past that got me to where I am, but I've learned a lot of things, and going forward, I'm just looking at my next 25 years, and I'm saying from now on, the new people that I want to meet and bring into my world are all people who correspond to the descriptions that I just put out there. They've got to be on the abundance-minded side of the spectrum. I can't have anyone new in my world for the rest of my life who thinks that the world is getting worse, or think the world is bad, or think the world is unjust and things were so much better in the past. I just can't have anyone in my room. I've checked out the value of talking with people like that since 1944, since 1950, and there's no profit from it. So I just decided from now on, I just don't associate with anyone like that. And more as I go forward for the rest of my life, it's just going to be on the abundance side of the spectrum. And, that thought alone will allow people to grow 10 times. I mean, it doesn't matter what you do, because having that thought, you're going to do a lot of different things that are in alignment with abundance.
You just made a really great point, is that I'd have to kind of go back and even hear exactly how you described it, but there's no profit. There's no financial profit. There's no psychological profit. There's no relationship profit in hanging out and associating with people. So the greatest takeaway that I always get from you, just delivered in many different ways, is that you are very clear on boundaries. You're very clear on alignment. You're very clear on standards, and you have a criteria, and you think about it, and you take it very seriously. Because I think a lot of people think about stuff. They'll maybe hear something, and they'll be like, oh, yeah, that kind of works, and then they're off to that kind of works, and then they're constantly bombarded with different people's value systems. But you've developed your own value system, and you adopt it to your own criteria and what is alignment from you, coming from places of scarcity mindset and abundance mindset. So on the next episode, I want to talk with you about how do you blow off people that aren't in that world. And when I say blow off, I mean, do you sit down and have Godfather talks with people that really aren't in that space? Do you just realize, our friend JR has this saying where he says, for those that get it, no explanation is needed. For those that don't, no explanation will do. I'd like to hear, and again, we'll talk about it on the next episode, how you actually remove yourself from relationships that just don't fit that, if you're in them currently and then they change, or, you kind of grow beyond that, or are you just so good at your boundaries that you just never even let those people in, and if they do somehow sneak their way in, how do you kind of just get away from it, sort of thing?
That'll be great. And, I just want to bring back a point that I made at the beginning of this presentation, and that is, I think the one reason why we have such extraordinary cooperation is that both of us check out on the things that I've talked about so far. I mean, in each other's minds, we say, well, Joe's that. And then in your mind, you say, Dan's that. And that's really the basis. Our relationship has really impacted a lot of other people. I had one yesterday who says, the thing that prompts me to go in this direction is just what I see happening between you and Joe.
Oh, that's great. I love hearing that. Yeah, and I hope that, and when I say hope, obviously, I do hope, and I also know that because I get a lot of feedback from people that listen to 10X Talk, that's exactly. They're being influenced by this, and that's our whole reasoning for putting this out there, is in a lot of ways, we just want to recruit more people that think like this and agree with it, because that's the world we want to live in. So, awesome. Anything else, Dan? We'll wrap up this episode.
No, that's great, because there's other dimensions to this, but they deserve their own presentation.
Great. So everyone, give us your comments if you'd like at 10xtalk.com. Go watch the funny video from Louis C.K. that we'll put up there along with this episode, and me and Dan will join you on the next episode of 10X Talk. So share this with anyone in your sphere of influence that needs to hear what we just talked about. Thank you.